The worth of uncut stone. Her grandmother had said it the morning before she died, pressing a smooth river stone into Marin's 7-year-old palm. A thing does not know its own value until the right hands hold it. Marin had not understood then. She understood it even less at 22, standing outside the Ashvale Pack's solstice gathering, in a dress she had borrowed from a woman 3 sizes smaller, her ribs pressing against the fabric's seams like something trying to escape. The stone was in her coat pocket. It always was. Chapter 1. The Dress and the Door. The Ashvale estate rose from the hill like something that had always believed in itself. Its windows threw amber light across the frost-bitten grass, and the sound of music, low strings, a horn, drifted down the slope to where Marin Calla stood at the iron gate, breathing vapor into the December air. She should not have come. She knew that with the same certainty, she knew the color of her own eyes. But Delia Yorn had made a point of announcing the gathering at the market that morning, loudly, in front of everyone who mattered, saying that all members of the Ashvale territory were welcome, gesturing at the handbill with one lacquered nail. Marin had felt the eyes of the market crowd move to her the way eyes always did, assessing, dismissing, moving on. Wolfless. Omega blood with nothing to show for it, no wolf spirit manifested, no rank to speak of. The Calla girl. The poor one. The one who mended other people's clothes for coin, and gathered herbs at the edge of the greywood where the better wolves did not bother to go. She had come because she was tired of standing outside things. The gate opened when she touched it, which surprised her. She had half expected it to know. 2 women from the mid-rank families stood near the entrance steps, wrapped in furs that cost more than Marin earned in a year. She recognized Petra Solm and her cousin, Vash. They saw Marin at the same moment she saw them, and the change in their expressions was slight. Just a narrowing, a recalibration. Marin Calla. Petra's voice was pleasant, the way a knife wrapped in cloth is pleasant. I didn't know the staff entrance had been moved to the front. Vash laughed, not unkindly enough to call it cruel, not kindly enough to call it anything else. Marin did not stop walking. Good evening, Petra. She kept her chin level and moved past them and up the steps because if she hesitated even a single beat, she would turn around and walk back down the hill and never come to anything ever again. Inside, the entry hall smelled of pine resin, beeswax, and the specific warm musk of a large pack gathered together. Wolves in formal dress filled the long rooms beyond, their laughter layered over the music. The women wore gowns of charcoal and deep red and midnight blue. Marin's borrowed dress was the pale yellow of old paper. It fit her across the hips and nowhere else, the neckline straining slightly, the hem 2 inches too short. She had pinned her hair up with a clasp she had repaired herself, the silver worn to the color of bone. A server passed with a tray, and she took a glass of something amber because holding a glass made a person look as if they belonged somewhere. She found a corner near one of the tall windows and looked out at the frozen grounds and tried to feel less like the wrong thing in the right place. That was when she heard it. Not heard. Felt. A low, resonant pressure in the back of her sternum, as if a door she had not known existed had been lightly knocked upon. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Room. She turned from the window. He was standing at the far end of the hall. Talith Vane, the Ashvale Alpha King. She had seen him from a distance once, maybe twice. He was not a man who moved through the territory frequently, or if he did not move through the parts of it where Marin existed. He was dark-haired, broad across the shoulders, dressed in black without ornament, and he was looking directly at her. Not at the room. At her. Marin looked behind herself. The window. Cold glass. Her own pale reflection. She looked back. He was still looking. Something about his expression she could not name. It was not the blankness of dismissal, and it was not the calculation she saw on Petra's face, and it was not the polite, distracted courtesy that the mid-rank wolves gave her. It was something more arrested than any of those. Like a man who has heard a sound he cannot account for. She pressed her grandmother's stone through the fabric of her coat pocket, hanging over her arm. Ground and cool. A thing does not know its own value until the right hands hold it. Delia Yorn materialized beside her with the efficiency of someone who had been watching for this exact moment. Delia was the Alpha King's social coordinator, which meant, in practice, that she decided who was worth the Alpha King's attention, and arranged proximity accordingly. She was beautiful and efficient, and subtly merciless. "You should circulate," Delia said, which meant you should leave this spot. "I'm comfortable here, thank you." "You're blocking the window alcove." Delia's smile was faultless. "This area is reserved for the high families." "I don't see a sign." Delia leaned slightly closer, dropping her voice to the register of advice between women. "Marin, you're here because the invitation was general. No one expected you to actually—" A breath, a gesture at Marin's dress, brief and devastating. "Come prepared to present yourself." The glass in Marin's hand had gone warm. She wanted, badly, to say something exact and final. She was still searching for it when a voice behind Delia said, "Delia." One word, but it rearranged the air in the room. Delia turned and straightened in the same movement, and there was Talith Vane, 2 feet away, looking at his social coordinator with an expression that was not anger, but was the thing beneath anger. "I need you to check the seating arrangement for the third table," he said. "There was an error." Of course. Now please." And Delia went, because that is what people did when the Alpha King said now, and then it was only the two of them near the window, and Marin became intensely aware of the gap between her hem and the floor, and the fact that her glass was nearly empty, and the low, resonant pressure in her chest that had not gone away. "She's wrong, for what it's worth," he said. His voice up close was lower than she expected, unhurried. "You came prepared, exactly as you needed to." Marin looked at him steadily. She was not practiced at being seen so directly by a man this powerful, and she felt the instinct to diminish herself, to say something self-deprecating, to perform the gratitude he was probably expecting. She did not. "What is the error at the third table?" she asked instead. A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Something that might, in different light, have been the beginning of a smile. "There isn't one." Chapter 3. Stones and Names. His name in her mouth felt new, the way a word feels the first time you speak it in a language you've only read. He asked her name, and she gave it plainly. Marin Kala, and watched his face to see if recognition would arrive in the usual diminishing form. "Oh, the herb gatherer. The one without a wolf." He only said, "I don't think we've met properly." "We haven't met at all." "Then I've been careless." He said it not as flattery, but as a genuine accounting of an error. They stood near the window, and the party swirled at a comfortable remove. He asked her questions. Not the social sorting questions she expected. Which family? What rank? Where were you schooled? But stranger ones. What did she think the music was doing wrong in the second movement? Had she ever been to the eastern edge of the Greywood, past the standing stones? What had she wanted as a child that she had not been given? The last one startled her into honesty. To be taken seriously. And now? Same answer. He was quiet for a moment. Across the room she could see Petra and Vash watching the two of them with expressions she had never seen directed at herself before. Not contempt, not pity. Something closer to disbelief. "You gather herbs near the Greywood border," he said. Not a question. "Most people don't notice that." "I do." She looked at him. "Have you been watching me?" "I noticed you in the territory some months ago. I made inquiries." Marin turned this over. "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that tell me you've been systematically undercharged for your work, that you refused a higher price because the woman asking was newly widowed, and that you gave your last measure of dried calendula to the Yorn children last winter when they had fever, even though you had no more to replace it." The room felt suddenly louder, or maybe quieter. She was not sure which. "Those are small things." "Small things are how character is made," he he said. Anyone can be decent when it costs nothing. She pressed the stone through her coat pocket again, without thinking about it. He glanced down at the motion. What is that? She hesitated, then drew it out. It was nothing to look at. A smooth gray river stone, unremarkable, palm-sized. She set it on his open hand before she could second-guess herself. He looked at it with full attention, as if it were a document he intended to memorize. Where did it come from? My grandmother. She said. She stopped. Tell me. So she told him her grandmother's saying. He listened with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for a thing and has learned patience in the meantime. He gave the stone back to her with both hands, carefully, as if he understood its weight. Chapter 4. The Accusation. The moment could not hold. Nothing that good in Marin's experience was permitted to hold. It was Delia who broke it, returning with color high in her cheeks and efficiency rebuilt around her like armor. With her was a man Marin recognized after a moment as Corvin Solm, Petra's father, a man with the broad authority of old money and a long memory for who owed him favors. Talith. Corvin's greeting was familial, proprietary. He barely glanced at Marin. I hoped to catch a word about the eastern grazing dispute. In a moment, Corvin. A flicker in Corvin's jaw. Certainly. Then he looked at Marin fully for the first time, and his eyes traveled the too short hem, the strained neckline, the worn clasp in her hair. And who is this? Marin Calla, she said before Talith could answer for her. Ah! The syllable held a library of condescension. The herb woman? He turned to Talith with a different pitch of concern, the performed concern of a man intervening for someone's own good. You should know that the Calla family has had debt claims filed against them twice in the last 4 years. I only mention it because, in a gathering context with valuables in the house, one does like to know who is present. The room did not go quiet. The music continued, the conversation continued, the server circled with his tray. But in the small geography between the 4 of them, something crystallized. Marin felt it move through her like ice water, the familiar anatomy of this particular humiliation, the suggestion that her poverty was a moral condition, that being without money was next to being without honor. She had felt this before. She had felt it in market squares, and at pack assemblies, and in the eyes of women who handed her their mending without quite meeting her gaze. She had never felt it with an audience she cared about until now. She looked at Talith and saw something she had not expected. Not discomfort, not the careful neutrality of a man who would smooth this over with diplomacy and private apology later. What she saw was a very clean, very cold anger. Corvin, Talith said with a quietness that should have been a warning. The debt claims you're describing were not Marin's. They were filed against a property held in a dead man's name. Her father's estate, which she inherited with no recourse, and has been resolving honestly for 4 years. He paused. I have the records, if you'd like to review them. I had occasion to look. Corvin's expression shifted through 3 versions of itself before settling on something smoothed over and opaque. I only meant, I know what you meant. Talith did not move. You may go speak to the 3rd table about that seating issue. Delia will show you where. It was the 3rd table that did not exist. Both of them understood it. Delia, to her credit, gathered Corvin efficiently and moved him away, and Marin stood with the blood loud in her ears and her stone held tight in her fist. You looked up my debt records? She said. I look up records for everyone in this territory. You just said you had occasion to look at mine. Yes. He met her eyes. I did. Chapter 5. The Greywood's Edge. She left the party before it ended. Not in flight, she made herself walk through the hall calmly, collecting her coat, acknowledging the server's offered glass with a small shake of her head. But outside, on the iron-cold slope, she breathed fast and let the night air dismantle whatever carefully constructed composure she had been wearing like a second borrowed dress. She did not hear him behind her until his footfall on the frozen grass. "Maren." She stopped but did not turn immediately. She needed the extra second to put herself back together. "You don't have to follow me out of your own party." "I'm not following you out," he said. "I'm following you to the better part of the evening." She turned then. He had brought her coat without her noticing. Her real coat. The heavy wool one, not the formal thing she'd carried in. She had left it with the attendant. He was holding it out to her. "How did you know which one was mine?" "The mended right cuff. I noticed it when you came in." She put the coat on without speaking, and they walked without discussing where they were walking, and somehow they ended up at the edge of the estate grounds where the formal garden broke against the tree line of the greywood. The ancient oaks stood dark and enormous against a sky scattered with frost-white stars. She had been to this boundary 100 times alone, approaching from the other direction, her basket over her arm, the wolf silence of the wood before her. It looked different from this side, or she was different, standing in it. "I don't have a wolf," she said. It came out straight, no apology built around it, just the fact. "I know." "That doesn't bother you." "Not in the way you mean." He stood beside her at the tree line. "My grandmother was a late manifest. She didn't find her wolf spirit until she was nearly 40. People treated her the way they treat you. She was the finest alpha this territory ever produced, and they had to spend 20 years revising their opinion of her one humiliation at a time." Maren considered this. "Is that meant to comfort me?" "It's meant to tell you the fault is in the people doing the measuring, not the thing being measured." Her grandmother's saying moved through her, quiet and exact. The stars were very bright. Somewhere in the wood an owl called, one long note, and the trees held it for a moment before letting it go. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said. "Not the Alpha King. You." He was quiet long enough that she thought he would deflect. Then, "I have sat with this territory's account books every winter solstice for 6 years, since my father died, and in those 6 years I have approved every formal gathering, every high family event, every tradition, and I have done all of it without once asking whether the people at the margins of the territory felt welcomed or seen, because no one made me look there." A pause. "You made me look there. Months ago, at the Greywood's edge, carrying a basket, not asking anyone's permission to exist in your own home territory." She felt the back of her throat tighten. "That's a very serious thing to say. I mean it seriously." She took the stone from her pocket and held it in her open palm between them, looking at it in the starlight. It was exactly what it had always been. Smooth, gray, valueless to every eye that had ever glanced at it. Her grandmother's hand pressing it into hers, warm and papery with age. The right hand's. "I should go home," she said. "I know." He did not push against it. "May I walk you to the gate?" She put the stone away and said yes. At the gate he said, "Come back, not to a party. Come back because this is your territory as much as anyone's, and because I would like—" He stopped, started again more honestly. "Because I would very much like to know you." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think you've made a good start." She walked down the hill. She did not look back, but she was almost certain she could feel him watching until the darkness folded her in. Chapter 6. What the territory learned Maren did not go back the next day. She had herbs to sort and mending to complete, and a practical, unhopeful streak that had served her well for 22 years, and she intended to let it serve her now. He came to her. Not grandly, not with escort or announcement. He arrived at her cottage door on a late afternoon when the sky was the specific pearl gray of deepest December, and he knocked, and when she opened the door, he was holding a jar of the same dried calendula she had given to the Yorn children the previous winter. "You shouldn't have tracked that down," she said. "And yet I did." She let him in. He sat at her table, which was small and scarred, and held a half-finished piece of mending and her herb catalogue and a stub of candle, and he sat in it as if it were the most comfortable chair in the Ashvale estate. She made tea. They talked for 3 hours. He came back the next afternoon, and the one after that. The territory noticed. Territories always do. The noticing moved from whisper to murmur to the particular loud social discomfort of people who had made a fixed judgment and must now revise it publicly. Petra Solm was seen to be polite to Marin at the market, with the effortful cordiality of someone practicing a foreign language. Vash began nodding instead of looking away. Delia Yorn, most unexpectedly of all, appeared at Marin's door one evening with an overly formal courtesy that was her version of an apology, and Marin accepted it because she was not interested in people's punishment, only in things being different. Corvin Solm went quietly to visit relatives in the northern province for the winter. No one mentioned it. Talith brought her to his estate library one afternoon and showed her the territory's records. Not the financial ones, but the old ones. The records of the wolfless, the late manifests, the Omegas without rank, whose names appeared in account after account, and were always listed last, always given least. Her own name was there, in her father's estate file, and she read it with the stone held in her palm. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked. She looked up. "You're asking me?" "Who else would I ask?" She thought for a long moment. "Start with the mending rate," she said. "The work that wolfless Omegas do in this territory is underpriced by at least 40% compared to ranked work of equivalent skill. Fix the rate schedule. Everything else follows from that." He was already writing. She sat in his library and watched him write, and outside the greywood stood in its winter, black and white, and the candles burned, and she felt something she was not quite ready to name settle around her like a coat that fit. Chapter 7. The night of the first snow. The first real snow of the season arrived 3 weeks after the solstice gathering, and it arrived at night, and Marin was at the Ashvale estate when it did. She had come to return a borrowed volume from the library. At least that was what she told herself, though the book was a pretext as thin as spring ice. She had come because 3 weeks of long afternoons had accumulated into something that had weight and direction, and she was 22 years old, and not a fool. They stood on the high terrace above the formal garden and watched the snow come down through the darkness, fat and silent, covering the frozen ground in stages. Inside, the fire in the library had burned to a deep, comfortable orange, visible through the glass doors. Outside, their breath rose in parallel columns. "My wolf spirit," he said quietly, after a time. "She first appeared to me at 17, during the worst week of my life, when my father was dying, and I had no idea how to be what the territory needed." He paused. "She came and sat with me in the dark, and did not offer solutions. Only company." Marin listened without speaking, understanding that this was being given to her carefully, like the river stone, given hand to hand. "I think," he continued slowly, "that the wolf spirit chooses its moment. Not by power, by need." She looked at him. "And I think," he said with the careful precision of a man who has rehearsed nothing and is speaking from a place below rehearsal, "that the most powerful thing I have felt in the last 3 weeks is in the presence of someone with no wolf spirit at all. So I am not sure the wolf is the point." The snow fell. The garden accumulated whiteness with no rush. She reached up and kissed him because she was done waiting for the right moment to arrive and had decided to make one. He received it without surprise. Only a stillness, followed by a response so genuine and unhurried that she felt it move all the way to the soles of her feet. His hands came up to her face with the care of someone holding something they understand to be both valuable and fragile, and she was neither cold nor borrowed into anymore, neither too small nor too large, neither wrong place nor wrong time. Just Marin Kalla. Just herself. Just exactly enough. She will not describe what came after in the terms of rank and ritual, because it did not belong to rank or ritual. The snow kept falling, and the fire burned low, and none of it needed a ceremony to be real. Chapter 8. Wolf Dawn. She manifested at dawn. She did not know what to call it exactly, even after it happened. It was not like the stories she had heard. No thunder, no dramatic ritual, no assembly of witnesses. She woke in the gray pre-light, with a feeling like warmth moving up through her spine. And then there was a presence in the room that had not been there, a great still creature at the foot of the bed, silver gray and enormous, watching her with amber eyes. Her wolf. Hers. Manifested at 22, without ceremony, without rank, in a room lit by snow glow through tall windows. Exactly as it needed to be, exactly on time. She sat up and looked at the wolf for a long time, and the wolf looked back, and Maren felt understood in a way that had nothing to do with being seen by another person. This was being seen by herself, the parts of herself that had waited. Talith was already awake, watching from the doorway. His own wolf, she had not seen it before, though she'd felt its weight in the territory's air, stood beside him, dark as charcoal, patient. "She's beautiful," he said, not with triumph, with something that sounded more like gratitude. Maren did not answer. She reached one hand toward her wolf, and the wolf pressed forward into her palm, warm and real, and she understood at last the full weight of what her grandmother had been trying to tell her. Not that she had been waiting to be valued, that she had always been. Epilogue. 1 year later. The river stone sat in a glass dish on the library windowsill at Ashvale Estate, which was also now Maren's home. She had placed it there the morning she moved in, and it had sat in its particular angle of light ever since, early morning in winter, late afternoon in summer, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know, which was most people, and perfectly legible to the two who did. The estate had changed in a year in ways both visible and invisible. The rate schedule Maren had proposed was in its 3rd revision, now applied territory-wide, and 3 wolfless omegas had been appointed to the territory's advisory council, where before there had been none. Delia Yorn had become, to her own apparent surprise, something approaching a genuine advocate. Petra Solm had sent a gift at the bonding ceremony, good fabric, well chosen, which was as close as Petra could get to a real apology, and Maren had accepted it in the spirit it was offered. On the anniversary of the solstice gathering, there was another one. Maren stood at the top of the estate steps in a gown the color of deep water, made by her own hands from fabric that fit her, that was made for her, that knew the shape of her and agreed with it. Her wolf moved beside her in the cold air, silver gray against the December dark. Inside, the music was already finding its shape. Talith came to stand beside her, and she felt the now familiar resonance between their wolves. That low, warm pressure in her sternum that had begun at a window 1 year ago and had never left. "Ready?" he asked. She thought of the market square, and the borrowed dress, and Petra's voice, rapping cruelty and pleasantry, and Corvin's measured insult, and the weight of every year of being the last name on every list, the last consideration in every room. She thought of her grandmother's hand, the stone, smooth in the bowl of her palm. A thing does not know its own value until the right hands hold it. She reached back to the windowsill just inside the open door. She had planned this, placed the stone in arm's reach deliberately, and picked it up. It had been worn by the river, smoothed by time, gray as winter sky, and wholly without display. Worth nothing and worth everything, depending entirely on who was looking and whether they knew how to look. She closed her fingers around it. "I've been ready," she said. "I just didn't know the right hands were coming." She walked through her own door, into her own light, and the door swung wide behind them both, and this time there was no question at all of who belonged inside. End.